The Persian Gulf does not forgive uncertainty. It is a body of water so shallow, so enclosed, so geopolitically charged that every nautical mile traversed by a United States Navy carrier strike group registers somewhere in a war room, in Washington, in Tehran, in Beijing, in Moscow. There are no accidents in this corridor. Every movement is a declaration. Every course change is a message. Every degree of bearing deviation is read, cataloged, and filed against a future moment of leverage. And on this particular morning, at 2:17 a.m., the message was already burning across every radar screen from the American naval base at Bahrain to the IRGC coastal command post at Bandar Abbas. The strike had happened 4 hours earlier. A coordinated surgical package, long-range bombers from Diego Garcia, Tomahawk cruise missiles from 2 attack submarines running silent in the Gulf of Oman, and a second wave of strike aircraft from the carrier's flight deck had impacted the hardened uranium enrichment complex beneath the mountain at Fordow and the centrifuge halls beneath the desert floor outside Natanz. Both sites had been rendered inoperable. The enrichment program, which had been advancing uranium to weapons-grade concentration levels in direct violation of 3 consecutive UN Security Council resolutions, was now a network of collapsed access tunnels and scorched centrifuge chambers entombed under thousands of tons of reinforced concrete. The carrier strike group had immediately begun its egress. The plan was straightforward in concept and brutally complex in practice. Transit the Strait of Hormuz before the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy could organize a coherent blocking force, 14 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. A choke point so geometrically constrained that even during routine peacetime transits, navigating a 100,000-ton warship through it demands continuous minute-by-minute course corrections from a navigator who does not blink during the passage. In the current tactical environment, the Strait of Hormuz was not a transit corridor. It was a contested engagement envelope with a maritime law facade painted over its walls. At 2:17 a.m., the Combat Information Center aboard the carrier was bathed in the cold blue light of its tactical displays. The air was recycled and cool, filtered to 68 degrees regardless of what the outside air was doing, smelling faintly of electronics, stale coffee, and the particular metallic tension that settles into a sealed space when the people inside it understand that the next 40 minutes will define the next 40 years of naval doctrine. The overhead panels had been dimmed to red battle lighting 30 minutes earlier. The faces of the watch team were painted in crimson and amber by the reflected glow of their screens. The senior watch officer stood at the central tactical plot with his arms folded, watching the radar picture assemble itself with the focused patience of a man who had trained for this moment and was not permitting himself to feel anything other than functional. The contacts appeared first as amber chevrons on the surface picture. Small, low profile, moving fast on a southwest bearing. Then more appeared. Then a cluster. By 2:19 a.m., the track supervisor had already called out 7 distinct contacts on bearing 340 degrees, range 38 nautical miles, closing at speeds inconsistent with commercial maritime traffic. The IRGC fast attack craft, low-slung, radar-absorbent, built for exactly this kind of swarm geometry, were already in organized, coordinated motion. 7 contacts. Then 9. Then 11. The strike group's Aegis cruiser, positioned 12 nautical miles ahead as the formation's forward defensive shield, registered the same picture simultaneously. The tactical action officer spoke to his team in the flat, declarative cadence of someone who had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times and had hoped with equal consistency never to see it arrive in actual practice. All weapon systems placed in active standby. The SPY-1D phased array radar operating at full power, its sweeping beams painting the surface of the Gulf with electromagnetic clarity that could resolve 11 individual hostile contacts and hand off refined firing solutions in under 4 seconds. 11 contacts, all accelerating, all on converging vectors with the strike group's projected track, none responding to radio hails on bridge-to-bridge channel 16, none transmitting AIS identification data, none showing navigation lights. The silence on the radio was not incidental. It was doctrine. It was a weapon deployed before anything else. IRGC asymmetric naval tactics had been studied, analyzed, wargamed, and briefed across Pacific and Fifth Fleet commands for 2 decades. The swarm approach, denying the adversary a single decisive target while saturating the defensive picture with simultaneous multi-axis threats, was designed at its core to force a binary choice between rigid adherence to rules of engagement and raw operational survival. By maintaining total radio silence and suppressing all standard identification broadcasts, the IRGC force preserved the legal ambiguity of intent while collapsing the distance to a point where ambiguity became tactically irrelevant. Distance is language. In the architecture of naval confrontation, the space between 2 vessels is not empty. It is the medium through which power speaks, and every yard that disappears changes what the language is saying. At 2:23 a.m., the Carrier Strike Group commander issued a fleet-wide order, Condition 1 Alpha. All battle stations manned. All weapons release authorities elevated to the maximum permissible under current rules of engagement. The ship's company, already at heightened combat readiness since the strike aircraft had launched 4 hours earlier, moved with the mechanical precision of a crew that had been waiting for this moment and was not wasting the preparation. The Phalanx CIWS turrets on the carrier's port and starboard sponsons rotated through their sectors, their thermal acquisition sensors locking onto the surface picture of the approaching formation and establishing tracking solutions on each contact in sequence. Each system operating in passive acquisition mode, building solutions, refining solutions, holding solutions. Watching, waiting. On the flight deck, smelling of JP-8 exhaust and the salt wind rolling in off the Gulf, 2 FA-18F Super Hornets assigned to the Combat Air Patrol had been airborne since the first strike aircraft returned to the pattern. Their aircrew, referenced only by their function and call sign, had been watching the Gulf below through targeting pod feeds that rendered the dark water as a monochrome world of heat signatures and cold shadow. By 2:24 a.m., both aircraft had been retasked from the carrier's strike controller, descend to 4,000 feet and establish an overhead orbit directly above the inbound IRGC formation. Not to engage, to be seen. To make the geometry of the situation completely legible to any adversary capable of reading it. 2 armed aircraft overhead communicates a precise and unambiguous sentence in the language of force. The effect was immediate and partial. 4 of the 11 contacts reduced speed. Their thermal exhaust profiles shifted and cooled on the infrared display as engine output dropped. But 7 contacts continued inbound at attack speed. The lead element, 3 fast attack craft in a tight wedge formation ahead of a larger IRGC frigate maintaining a staggered trail position, had committed. At 2:26 a.m., the closest point of approach calculation, running continuously on the cruiser's display, read 1,200 yards and falling. The navigator aboard the carrier delivered his report to the bridge in the controlled monotone that emergency conditions demand. Current heading and speed would result in a CPA of approximately 580 yards to the lead IRGC vessel within 8 minutes and 40 seconds. 580 yards. Between armed combatants operating under elevated rules of engagement, with shore-based surveillance systems recording every maneuver from both coastlines, 580 yards was not a near miss in any operationally meaningful sense of that phrase. It was contact geometry. It was the mathematical expression of what the adversary intended the next few minutes to produce. The strike group commander did not alter course. He did not reduce speed. He did not initiate a course change query upward to Fleet Command for political cover. He stood at the central plot in the red-lit silence of the CIC, where every person present was managing their own controlled version of the stress that the situation demanded of them, and he kept his eyes on the track geometry and issued no order that changed the vector of his ship by a single degree. This decision, this specific, deliberate, documented act of holding still, was the architectural foundation of everything that followed. The mathematics of deterrence demanded it. Any course deviation that could be read as hesitation would register on every IRGC radar screen as the first empirical evidence that American resolve had a calculable breaking point. And in the logic of asymmetric confrontation, Evidence of a threshold is not a tactical concession. It is a targeting solution for every future standoff. The commander maintained course, 12 knots, heading 135 degrees, unchanged. The MH-60R Seahawk, assigned to the strike group's surface warfare coordination mission, had been airborne for 43 minutes, running a search pattern 18 nautical miles ahead of the formation. At 2:27 a.m., the crew received new tasking: close the lead IRGC element, establish a laser designation solution on the frigate's bridge structure and forward weapon systems, and hold it visible to the frigate's own electro-optical sensors. The intent was surgical in its precision and unambiguous in its message. No weapons release authority was granted. The crew was not asked to engage. They were asked to make it unmistakably clear that a complete, refined, ready-to-apply targeting solution existed for every critical system on that frigate, and that the only variable between the solution and its application was a decision by someone not aboard this helicopter. The crew executed within 90 seconds. The Seahawk descended to 380 feet over the black water and locked the laser designator onto the frigate's bridge structure with a stability that the targeting system maintained through the aircraft's motion and through the thermal turbulence rolling off the warm Gulf below, invisible to any naked eye on the water below. To every electro-optical sensor aboard the IRGC frigate, it registered as a direct light source from above, unwavering, present, and carrying the precise tactical meaning it had been designed to carry. The IRGC frigate held its course for 51 more seconds after the solution was established. Then it began to turn. A shallow 10-degree heading changed northwest first, then 20 degrees. Then a committed 38-degree turn that swung the bow fully around toward the Iranian coastline. The thermal signature of its exhaust stacks flared on the Seahawk's FLIR display as engineering spaces below decks pushed power to the turning shaft. But the three fast attack craft in the lead wedge did not follow. They accelerated. This was the adaptation. The IRGC did not plan this standoff as a single-vector confrontation. The frigate's withdrawal was theater, designed to produce a moment of reorientation, a split second where the U.S. NATO response picture recalculated and the tracking priority redistributed. The fast attack craft pressing forward were the actual instrument, small enough for legal ambiguity at close range, fast enough to close remaining distance before a deliberate engagement decision could be fully processed through command authority, low enough on the radar horizon to increase the complexity of terminal intercept geometry for the failing system. At 2:29 a.m., the lead craft crossed 900 yards, then 820, then 760. The carrier's deck vibrated with the constant low resonance of four massive shafts pressing 100,000 tons of warship through black water at a speed that generated its own visible bow wave from the bridge wing, a white line extending out into the darkness like a line drawn on the surface of the ocean. The navigator was reporting bearing rates in a voice that was professionally flat at its surface and operating at the absolute boundary of that flatness beneath it. The lookout on the starboard bridge wing had been watching the approaching vessel through binoculars for 90 seconds and could now resolve its bow shape with his naked eye, a low, dark wedge driving a sharp white plume of spray through the night. The phalanx on the cruiser elevated its barrel cluster 3.7 degrees and held its tracking lock across all three inbound contacts simultaneously. Complete firing solutions on all three. The tactical action officer had his hand resting on the release switch. He was producing adrenaline at a rate his body would spend the next several hours recovering from. He did not activate the firing sequence. He waited. The Seahawk descended to 310 feet. The laser solution moved from the withdrawing frigate directly onto the cockpit structure of the lead fast attack craft. Bright, unwavering, undeniable. The lead craft broke at 680 yards. A hard starboard turn executed in under 1 second, the bow pivoting 90 degrees away from the strike group's track. The two craft behind it followed within 4 seconds, their high-speed turns carving white spirals into the dark water that resolved on the radar picture as the visible geometry of a standoff that had come within less than a third of a nautical mile of becoming something with consequences measured in lives and geopolitical upheaval, not yards and bearing rates. The CPA counter froze at 680 yards. Then it began to climb. The CIC did not erupt. The senior watch officer noted the contact behavior change in the tactical log with a timestamp accurate to the second. The tactical action officer ordered a phalanx reset to standby ready status. The navigator updated the routing estimate. The watch team moved to their next task. This was not a celebration. This was the operational tempo of a crew that understood what had just happened was one phase of a sequence, not a conclusion. It was 2:31 a.m. The reprieve lasted exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds. At 2:35 a.m., the electronic warfare suite on the cruiser registered an X-band fire control radar emission from bearing 093 degrees, nearly due east, from the direction of the Iranian coastline near Keshem Island. Identified within 6 seconds by the automated recognition library and confirmed by the electronic warfare officer within 11, a mobile shore-based anti-ship missile battery. Active. Tracking. The dwell time of its acquisition beam on the cruiser's hull was 1.9 seconds per sweep, fully consistent with pre-launch acquisition for the C-802 system. The EA-18G Growler, loitering at altitude, had the emitter geolocated within 11 seconds. The jamming pod came online at full output power at 2:35:17 a.m., flooding the X-band frequency with coherent electromagnetic noise, sufficient to render the battery's targeting solution operationally degraded. The battery fired anyway. 2 C-802 anti-ship missiles lifted off from the coastal battery at 2:36 a.m. Their boost phases detected by the carrier's passive infrared sensors within 2.2 seconds of ignition, 2 thermal columns rising from the dark coastline and arcing southwest over the water. Subsonic. Sea skimming profile. Approximately 4 minutes to terminal phase engagement on the strike group. The calculation on the Iranian side was tactical and cold. Even an intercepted missile consumes time, munitions, and decision-making bandwidth. Even a failed strike demonstrates capability. The missiles were not expected to defeat Aegis. They were expected to cost the Americans something measurable. The cruiser's tactical action officer authorized the standard missile engagement at 2:36:11 a.m. under pre-delegated release authority. 2 SM-2 Block 3B missiles came off the forward VLS cells in a ripple-fire sequence. The percussion of the launch traveled through the cruiser's hull and across the surface of the water around the ship. A double concussive beat felt through every boot sole and every hand, resting on every console aboard the vessel. The first SM-2 intercepted the lead, C-802 at 9.4 nautical miles. A brief intense flash above the eastern horizon, 1 second of a hard white light, then a spreading smoke smear against the sky. The second C-802 executed a mid-course maneuver at 2:36:23 a.m. A 14-degree bearing deviation, a manual guidance correction transmitted from the shore battery, attempting to defeat the Aegis intercept geometry that the second SM-2 was already riding toward it. The deviation was detected within 1 second. The revised intercept geometry was uplinked to the second SM-2 in flight 1 second after that. The missile's control surfaces responded in fractions of a second. The intercept occurred at 6.1 nautical miles. The detonation lit the eastern horizon for 4 full seconds, bright enough that the port bridge wing lookout turned without being instructed to, bright enough that the Seahawk crew had to reduce FLIR gain to prevent sensor saturation. At 2:36:31 a.m., the Growler's jamming pod registered a thermal protection shutdown. 31 seconds of sustained full power output had pushed internal temperature above operating threshold. The system cycled to 60% output. The shore battery's radar, previously blinded, had a partial acquisition window. This was the moment the IRGC had designed their entire operational sequence to reach. At 2:37 a.m., a contact appeared below the surface, bearing 282 degrees, range uncertain but estimated within 15 nautical miles based on acoustic signal analysis. Characteristics consistent with a Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine in snorkeling mode. The strike group's towed array sonar had been tracking an ambiguous anomaly on that bearing for 13 minutes without confident classification. The post-launch acoustic environment was saturated with cavitation noise, thermal wake disturbances, and the residual underwater acoustic signature of 2 SM-2 launches. Classification confidence, 31%. The carrier's commanding officer made the call in under 2 minutes. Accelerate. Do not reduce speed for sonar optimization. A submerged contact at uncertain range in the outer Hormuz approaches was a serious threat variable, but reducing the formation's speed in this tactical environment at this moment created a worse geometry than the one they were already managing. Speed degraded any submerged fire control solution against a maneuvering carrier group far more effectively than any sonar improvement that reduced speed could provide. The strike group increased to 16 knots. The P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft reached the sonar datum at 2:44 a.m. and deployed a passive sonobuoy barrier pattern across the estimated operating envelope. The acoustic picture that assembled over 7 minutes was unambiguous at the level of classification, ambiguous at the level of intent. Kilo class. Iranian Navy. Snorkeling at 180 feet. 4 knots. Heading northwest, a track running parallel to the strike group, not intercepting it. The submarine was not configured for an attack run. It was configured for documentation. A sensor platform wearing the identity of a weapons system, positioned close enough to generate maximum psychological weight while staying outside the threshold of unambiguous hostile intent. The data was transmitted to 5th Fleet headquarters in real time. Weapons release authority was not granted. The P-8 maintained tracking. The crew watched. The submarine watched. Everyone present understood precisely what everyone else present was doing. The strike group entered the Strait of Hormuz transit corridor at 3:08 a.m. The transit was 23 minutes of compressed, unrelenting tactical awareness. Navigation lights from commercial tankers visible in both shipping lanes on either side of the military transit corridor. Shore lights from Oman to the south and Iran to the north, close enough that their character could be distinguished without optical aids from the bridge wing. The electronic warfare picture saturated with simultaneous emissions, Iranian coastal defense radars, Omani maritime surveillance systems, commercial navigation transponders, and the strike group's own sensors, forcing manual filtering protocols to prevent display overload. 3 IRGC patrol vessels materialized from the Iranian coastal clutter at distances between 3.2 and 5.1 nautical miles off the starboard beam and held parallel tracks throughout the transit. No transmissions, no hails, no response to any communication. Simply present, burning quietly on every tactical display in the strike group as questions that had already been answered and did not need to be asked again. The last ship in the strike group cleared the eastern margin of the strait and entered the Gulf of Oman at 3:31 a.m. At 3:36 a.m., the strike group commander transmitted a status report to 5th Fleet headquarters. 9 lines. No qualifying language. 11 surface contacts engaged and held. 2 anti-ship missiles intercepted. 1 submerged contact tracked and documented. 0 course deviations. 0 heading changes outside planned navigational sequences, 0 friendly casualties, 0 systems failures. The costs were enumerated with equal precision: 2 SM-2 Block 3B missiles at $2.1 million replacement cost each. The Growler's jamming pod requiring 11 days of depot maintenance before return to flight schedule. The towed array sonar requiring 4 hours of recalibration from launch acoustic displacement. Both combat air patrol pilots 17 minutes over maximum continuous sortie duration thresholds. The entire ship's company carrying the physiological debt of 6 hours and 51 minutes at general quarters, a debt that does not clear with the watch rotation, does not file away with the tactical log, and does not appear in any formal assessment of the engagement outcome. These were not failures. They were deliberate pre-accepted costs, the price of maintaining an unchallengeable posture in a waterway where the challenge itself is the adversary's primary instrument of leverage. 11 contacts. 2 missiles intercepted. 1 submarine documented. 23 minutes through the most contested waterway in the operational theater. 680 yards, the precise distance at which the IRGC discovered that the threshold they were searching for does not exist and was never there to find. 0 inches yielded. In this part of the world, at this moment in history, the Strait of Hormuz is not merely a body of water. It is the physical expression of a question that adversaries have been asking for decades, in different languages, with different instruments, against different hulls. At what point does American resolve become American hesitation? The answer has been given. The track data is on record. The geometry is permanent. The watch changes. The threat persists. And the line holds because the people standing on it have already decided, long before the radar returns appear, long before the bearing rates begin to climb, that it is not theirs to concede. That decision was made in a training environment, not on a bridge wing. It was inscribed in doctrine, not improvised under pressure. And in every future waterway where an adversary runs that same calculation, they will find the same answer waiting for them. The record endures. So do they.